The sun was just a whisper on the edge of the world. It painted the mountaintops in soft colors of orange and pink. This was the time of day that Kale loved most. It was quiet. It was peaceful. But on this morning, something was different. A sound, like a deep rumble, echoed from the highest peak. It was not thunder. It was something alive. Kale, with his wooden sword in hand and a heart full of youthful courage, decided to climb. He had to see what was making that sad, lonely sound. Every step he took was a step towards a new adventure, though he did not know it yet. He climbed for what felt like hours. The air grew thin and cold. The rocks were sharp beneath his worn leather boots. Finally, he reached a wide ledge, hidden behind a curtain of morning mist. There, curled up and magnificent, was a dragon. Its scales shimmered like 1,000 emeralds, even in the dim light. One of its great wings was bent at an odd angle, and a deep cut marked its side. The dragon looked at Kale with eyes as old as the mountains themselves. They were not filled with anger, but with pain and a deep, weary sadness. Kale stood frozen, his small sword feeling very silly in his hand. Instead of running, Kale took a slow step forward. He dropped his wooden sword. It clattered softly on the stone floor of the ledge. The dragon watched his every move, its great head tilted. Kale reached into his satchel and pulled out a piece of dried meat, his own breakfast. He held it out on his flat palm, an offering of peace. It was a small gesture, a tiny boy offering food to a creature of immense power. He wasn't a mighty warrior, he was just a boy, and he saw another being that was hurt and alone, just like he sometimes felt in the big, wide world. The dragon lowered its head slowly, cautiously. Its warm breath washed over Kale's hand, smelling of smoke and stone. It gently took the meat from his palm with its massive teeth. In that moment, something shifted between them. It was a silent promise. Kale saw not a monster, but a friend. And the dragon, who the world called Ignis, saw not a threat, but a kind heart. This was how it began. Not with a great battle or a heroic deed, but with a simple act of kindness as the new day was born, a silent agreement to trust each other completely. Their friendship grew with each passing day. Kale would bring Ignis healing herbs for his wing and fresh fish from the river below. He would talk to the great dragon for hours, telling him stories of his village and his dreams of becoming a true warrior. Ignis would listen, his deep eyes full of understanding. He would respond with soft rumbles and gentle nudges of his great head. Kale learned that dragons were not mindless beasts of legend. They were wise. They were thoughtful. They felt joy and sorrow just like he did. Ignis learned that humans were not all hunters and dragon slayers. Some were gentle and loyal. Soon, Ignis's wing was healed. The day he first stretched it to its full glorious width, the sun caught on his emerald scales, and he seemed to fill the entire sky. Kale watched in awe. Ignis lowered his back, an invitation. Kale's heart beat like a drum. He climbed onto the dragon's strong back, holding on tightly to the spines that ran down his neck. With a powerful push from his hind legs, Ignis leaped from the mountain ledge. For the first time, Kale was flying. The world rushed away beneath them, a patchwork of green forests and silver rivers. The wind sang in his ears, a song of pure freedom. Flying was only the beginning of their training. They became a team, a single unit of boy and dragon. Kale learned to guide Ignis with gentle shifts of his weight and quiet words. Ignis learned to anticipate Kale's thoughts, banking and diving as if they shared one mind. They practiced fighting together. Kale would swing his real sword, now made of steel, from Ignis's back, while the dragon would let out controlled bursts of brilliant green flame at targets Kale pointed to. They were a dance of steel and fire, a perfect harmony of strength and skill, moving as one being. Their adventures took them far from the lonely mountain. They explored hidden valleys where waterfalls tumbled into crystal-clear pools. They soared over vast deserts where the sand dunes looked like golden waves. They saw wonders that Kale had only ever dreamed of. With every flight, their bond deepened. Kale was no longer just a boy, and Ignis was no longer just a dragon. They were brothers of the sky. They relied on each other, trusted each other, and knew that as long as they were together, there was nothing they could not face. They were ready for anything the world could throw at them. Their peaceful days of training and exploration were not to last forever. A darkness began to spread from the northern lands. It was a creeping shadow, a blight that poisoned the earth and twisted living things into monstrous shapes. It was led by a sorcerer known as Malachor, a being whose heart was as cold and dead as the land he corrupted. Villages began to fall silent. Fear spread like a sickness on the wind. Stories reached Kale's own village of a great shadowy army that moved without sound, leaving only despair and destruction in its wake. Kale knew he and Ignis could not hide on their mountain forever. The call for heroes went out across the land. The king sent riders to every corner of the kingdom, seeking anyone brave enough to stand against the encroaching darkness. Kale, now a young man with a warrior's resolve in his eyes, knew what he had to do. He looked at Ignis, who was watching the blackened sky to the north. The dragon let out a low growl, a sound of defiance, not fear. There was no need for words between them. They both understood the threat. This was not a training exercise. This was real. The world needed them, and they would answer the call. The journey to the king's fortress was grim. They flew over lands that were once green and vibrant, now grey and lifeless. The rivers ran thick with black sludge, and the trees were skeletal claws, reaching for a sky that never saw the sun. The silence was the worst part. There were no birds, no animals, only the whisper of a foul wind. Kale felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He was not just a boy playing at being a warrior anymore. The weight of the world felt heavy on his shoulders. He was afraid of failing, of losing his home, of losing his best friend. As they neared the battlefront, the air grew thick with the smell of smoke and sorcery. Below them, Malachor's army swarmed across the plains, a tide of shadow creatures and corrupted beasts. At their head was Malachor himself, riding a monstrous skeletal wyvern. Kale looked at the horrifying sight and felt his courage waver. But then, he felt Ignis's powerful muscles shift beneath him, a steady and reassuring presence. The great dragon turned his head and looked at Kale with his ancient wise eyes. In that look, Kale found his strength again. They were not alone. They were together, and together they would face the storm. The battle began with a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. Malachor's shadow army crashed against the king's soldiers like a black wave. Kale and Ignis dove into the heart of the fight. Ignis unleashed a torrent of emerald fire, a brilliant green light that pushed back the suffocating darkness. The flames cleansed the corrupted creatures, turning them to ash. Kale, from his perch on Ignis's back, swung his sword with precision and purpose. His blade, shining with a faint light of its own, cut through the shadows, defending the soldiers on the ground below. They were a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. They fought as they had trained, moving as one. Kale would spot a threat, a cluster of shadow beasts about to overwhelm a group of knights, and Ignis would bank sharply, diving to help them. The dragon's claws and tail were as deadly as his fire, and Kale's sword was a blur of silver steel. But the enemy was endless. For every shadow they destroyed, two more seemed to rise from the poisoned ground. Malachor, on his skeletal mount, laughed from above, his voice a chilling sound that drained the hope from men's hearts. He directed his dark magic at Kale and Ignis, sending bolts of pure shadow energy hurtling towards them. Malachor focused his power on Kale, seeing the boy as the heart of the resistance. A bolt of darkness, faster and more powerful than the others, shot towards him. Kale tried to raise his shield, but he was too slow. At the last second, Ignis twisted in mid-air, taking the full force of the blast on his side. The dragon cried out in pain and began to fall from the sky. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Kale's heart. But even as they fell, Ignis protected Kale, curling his body around the young warrior. They crashed to the ground, a tangle of green scales and battered armor. For a moment, all was lost, but their bond was stronger than any dark magic. Lying on the battlefield, Kale touched Ignis's wounded side. He poured all of his courage, his love, and his hope into that touch. He would not let his friend fall. Ignis felt Kale's unbroken spirit and found a new well of strength. With a mighty roar that was a cry of pure defiance, Ignis rose again, his wounds glowing with a faint green light. He unleashed a firestorm more powerful than any before, a pure, cleansing flame that tore through Malachor's magic. Together, they faced the sorcerer one last time, and this time, the light won. The shadow army dissolved, and peace, hard-won and precious, returned to the land. They had proven that their bond, forged in kindness and tested in battle, was truly unbreakable.